Hello everyone, Pep Productions here. Welcome to the first ever movie roundup. January is done. It's gone. I watched 4 movies in January, and there's 4 weeks in January, so we're gonna do that. So if you're just in here wondering what the hell is going on here, I basically am watching a movie every week, and I am writing up a little review of that and putting it on Letterboxd. If you want to check out my Letterboxd, the link is in the description below, and it's written out right here for you. But also I wanted to, each month, take a little step back, look at each movie that I watched, and talk about them with you guys. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Here are the movies I watched in January. Mank, Casino Royale, The Lighthouse, and Yes God Yes. From here on out, I will be talking about each of the movies in detail. I will be putting timestamps in the description below, so if you want to see one movie or you don't want to see another movie, you can skip around to each time when the movie is being talked about. In that area, I will be giving a brief synopsis of the movie if you don't know what it's about. I'll be talking about some of my thoughts on it, and since I'm going to be talking a little more in depth about these movies than I went into in my reviews, I'd like to say a big fat spoiler warning for all of these movies. That is a little more significant than it usually might be, because a lot of these movies came out rather recently. We are starting off with Mank. This came out at the end of 2020, and this movie is about Herman J. Mankiewicz, the writer of Citizen Kane, one of the biggest, most important movies of all time. It basically sets up the movie so that it shows his life through the writing of this story. So like he's writing the screenplay for it, and then also it's flashing back to the things that inspired him to write this the way that he is. He's not at his prime anymore, and we get to see him at his prime, which is fun, and we get to see him fall from that prime as time goes on. And I did enjoy this movie, but there were things about it that would just made me go like, well, did you really have to? And I think the biggest example of that is the way that the movie is. So it's meant to be an old film. It's supposed to look, sound, feel, everything. It has black and white. It's a completely original score, but it's supposed to sound like old big band music. The fades, like the long fades on a scene, it just functioned as an old movie. And like the biggest offender of that for me was the film grain and like the damaged film effect, where like there's little blips and like lines and stuff. It felt forced. The black and white's fine, the music is fine. The film grain on it, that's where I really drew the line, I think. It'd be like an important dialogue scene, and then there's just a giant blip, and you're like, man, that just took my attention away from what they were saying. It's not like you can rewind and watch it again, because like it's still gonna have a blip, so you just kind of have to like take it with stride. They did use it kind of sparingly, but it did bother me every time it showed up. Another thing that kind of threw me off was the structure of this movie. It like starts off with him showing up to the place where he is writing the story. So he's bedridden, he has an assistant that types up all of his stuff, and it shows him writing the story. Then it transitions back in time to when he was like a hot Hollywood writer, and like he comes to work for this company, and he gets his brother in there too, and then it comes back to the present, and then he's writing the story again, and then it goes back, and then it comes back to the present, and then it goes back. It just keeps flipping between the two. And I don't think you could have told the story in a different way, but I feel like the way that like they cut back, like the times that they cut back, it felt arbitrary. It was just like, okay, well, we don't have any interesting thing going on with him in the present, so we're gonna have a flashback to back when something interesting was happening in the past. And now that story's done, so we're gonna go back to where the main story left off, and then when that gets boring again, we'll just go back. I've heard people say that that's done on purpose, because it's supposed to mirror the flashbacks in Citizen Kane itself. That just seems arbitrary. That was a great storytelling device in Citizen Kane. It worked really well in Citizen Kane, but like the story was a lot tighter in Citizen Kane. This movie doesn't have a tight story. It has a realistic story about real life people doing real life things. And something else is that there was super strong dialogue. It was really good. It was too good. It just sounded like they were speaking dialogue. it made sense for Mank to be saying all this stuff in dialogue because he wrote dialogue for a living. So it made sense for him to talk like dialogue, but a lot of other characters did as well, and I don't know, I don't want to knock it for having good writing. It just felt too crafty, too artsy, too filmy. Some other things I want to talk about. The performances in this movie were really good. Gary Oldman played Herman Mankiewicz, and he just absolutely claps into the role like he always does. When you saw Mankiewicz on screen, you saw Mankiewicz on screen. But another character in this movie was Charles Dance as William Hearst. He, looked the part for me in this movie. He didn't act the part. He did a good job acting, but it kind of felt like Charles Dance was in the movie. And I didn't buy his American accent, but that happens a lot. Accents can be bad. This one was no exception. There were a couple of characters that I've already mentioned. Mankiewicz's assistant and his brother. They felt like they didn't belong in this movie. Both of the performances were great, but they felt like they were just kind of there because they were technically there, when it happened in real life. His assistant was there to type up whatever he was writing down, and she kind of gets, involved in things, but, it's not to a particular point where it feels important. The editor would come in and say, "This is good, but it's too long, too confusing," and she'd be like, "Yeah, it is too long and too confusing. You need to fix that right now, mister." And when he wasn't doing that, she'd be really concerned about it, but we already knew that the editor was concerned about it. She was just proxy editor, which she might have been in real life. I don't know. And Lily Collins did a great job with it. So with all that in mind, I still really liked this movie. It had a lot going for it, and the stuff that did bother me about it didn't really bother me too much. So I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. So next up is Casino Royale. This movie came out in 2006. It's a kind of a soft reboot of the James Bond movies. This time they kind of take James Bond back to the beginning of his career, and you see him be kind of cocky, young, inexperienced. He's not the calm, collected James Bond that we know him to be. He's rough around the edges. I had a fun time with it, but a lot of things weighed it down for me. First thing that kind of comes to mind is the fact that it was too meta. You could tell that it was a James Bond reboot, because they shoved it down your throat every chance they got. They'd set you up for the cliches, and then they'd either deliver on them or they wouldn't. Either way, it was a huge elbow to the side. It's huh, do you get it? This is a thing that James Bond says. At one point in the casino, he gets a martini. He drinks it and he's like, "Ooh, this is good. I should get these more often." Get it? Because it's his drink. He drinks martinis. Then later on, he orders a martini. The bartender is like, "Do you want it shaken or stirred?" Wink, wink. I can't actually wink, but just imagine that I did. Because the whole line is shaken, not stirred is the point. And James Bond, shrugs it off. He's like, "I don't care." Because, oh, ho, ho, get it? Because they referenced the thing that James Bond used to say, but he didn't say it. Because it's a new Bond. He doesn't know that he wants it shaken, not stirred. There was, wordplay in one of the earlier scenes when he meets Vesper. I don't remember Vesper's last name. The Bond girl, I guess I'll call her. She walks in and she talks about how, she's, in charge of the money. And he's just every penny, because it's a reference to the character of Moneypenny. And it's clever because it referenced something that you know as the audience. It was actually kind of confusing because I thought that was their way of saying that she was Moneypenny, and she isn't. She sure isn't. Actually, let's get into Vesper because she's my next bullet point. So Vesper, I'm gonna Google her name real quick. Vesper Lind. Okay, so Vesper Lind, she is in charge of the money that he's gambling with. Right away, she's developed into the Bond girl, and she does end up being seduced by him. Well, it's actually kind of more she seduces him, but that's where we're getting to. She feels smart, confident, and her own character, and is a good foil for Bond. He's this cocky, arrogant guy, knows what he's doing because he just does, and does things, and they don't always work out for him, and she's there to chastise him for that. And she fills that role very well of keeping James Bond in check throughout the movie, but still being on his side, obviously. And I really liked that dynamic. As things went on and the plot unfolded, and more stuff happened to these two characters. You could see the bond. see what I did? It's his name, Bond. You see the characters like grow together. And the romance blossoms rather organically, I'd say. I didn't buy the whole, now that I've done this, I'm just gonna quit and not go back, and that's it, I'm done, I'm just gonna spend the rest of my life with you, sort of thing. It definitely set me up for failure with buying the fact that she was the villain. I forget the reasoning why they explained it, because they did such a bad job with it too. She dies, and James Bond tries to resuscitate her, it doesn't work. And then he gets a phone call from M, and she just like explains Vesper's like motivation. I don't even remember what the explanation was, but she was just like, oh yeah, she was a villain, but for the right reasons, because she was being threatened or whatever. So you should definitely care about her. And you're like, well yeah, I know I should have cared about her, because like I had a genuine connection with her. But James Bond doesn't care about her. I think he even says like the bitch is dead or something like that. He just completely like writes her off. It didn't feel natural. It felt like, oh, well, they wrote a 2-hour Casino Royale where the end of the movie is they just go off together. And then they were like, that's not how the book ends. We need to make it the way that the book ends, kinda. So we need the whole, like, twist thing to happen now. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's how it felt. It just felt like tacked on at the end. Completely changing subjects. The choreography in this movie was phenomenal. They just looked so natural doing what they were doing, but what they were doing did not seem natural at all. When they got to action scenes, it felt almost like a different movie. It was like, okay, now we're an action film. Go. People were doing like backflips and like epic parkour. Even like watching it, you feel like you're gonna hurt yourself. And you're like, it's all this crazy stuff going on, jumping off buildings and stuff. You know, like typical like strong action sequences. And then it came back to like being this spy movie. And like it felt cool, and in a different movie it probably wouldn't have bothered me, but in this one it did. I had a good time with this movie, but like a lot of the stuff that I talked about kind of like pulled me out of the movie. So I ranked this movie a lot lower than I thought I would. This is a 3.5 out of 5. It's like closer to a 4 than it is to a 3. It's like so close to being a 4, but I just couldn't rationalize all of these things and it being a 4 out of 5. So it's a 3.5 out of 5, and that's just how it is. So The Lighthouse is a psychological horror movie. Came out in 2019, and it's just two guys going crazy. That's about it, honestly. This movie is intentionally vague about a lot of things. It doesn't explain itself very much. It doesn't drive the point home. It just kind of happens, and you just have to sit there afterwards and interpret what you saw. And the way I interpreted what I saw, I think, is kind of unique to how a lot of other people saw it. Although I haven't really had this conversation with many people, but watching and reading reviews of it, it doesn't seem like anyone else really took this perspective. And the perspective that I got during the film is that we saw everything from Robert Pattinson's point of view. And therefore, in his own delusional state, anything that happened in this movie can and should be called into question. And I guess what I'm saying there is that there is a chance that what happened in this movie did not actually happen in the movie. I'm not saying this is the right way to think about it, because like that's betraying the point of this movie, but it so pointedly delivers the idea that what Robert Pattinson's character is seeing and what's being told to him by Willem Dafoe are two different things. One of the points that a lot of people come to is that, oh, well, Willem Dafoe's character is also crazy. And I'm not saying that's not the case, because it's entirely possible and likely, but the way that I saw it was that Robert Pattinson was just losing it, and Willem Dafoe wasn't. And I think that's interesting to think about, because then it leaves the question of, who is Willem Dafoe's character? What is he about? Because they establish enough of Robert Pattinson's delusions that you just do have to question what information you're getting and whether that's true or not. I feel like I just keep hitting the same idea as opposed to like expanding on it. So I'm just gonna leave that alone for now for you to think about. Have you seen this movie? What were your thoughts on it? I really am curious. God, it's such a strange movie that you could interpret so much from it. You could just completely like have a totally different take on this than anyone else has. And I want to hear about that from you. in the comments below. As far as ratings go, this movie got a 5 out of 5. For me, it was just perfect. There was nothing that I would want more from this movie. There's nothing I wanted less from this movie. It was astounding. And finally, we're gonna talk about Yes, God, Yes. What this movie is about a teenage girl who's like growing up in the middle of the United States. She goes to a Catholic school, and basically they preach so much about abstinence. Sex is like only there for procreation, everything else is evil. I believe they actually do describe it as evil. So it's pretty rough, pretty heavy-handed in their teachings of this abstinence-only policy. And the problem with that is this girl, Alice, is in the middle of a very big sexual awakening. And she doesn't really know how to justify that against her beliefs and teachings. And like all of the people around her are just enforcing like the school's point of view. Her friends, her classmates, her teachers. There's a rumor spread that she had sex with one of her classmates, so like she gets shunned. One of the teachers finds out and chastises her for it. She's supposed to do something for math, and the teacher just takes it away from her like right before it happens. And to like kind of like get her mojo back, Alice decides to go to this weekend retreat that the school is putting on. Every like problem that you can imagine happening happens at this retreat. I think it was a well-crafted film. I really appreciate what the director was trying to do. Natalia Dyer, I think that's how you say her name. She did good. I really related to her character a lot. She did a really good job of like selling this character to me, and I really appreciate that specifically in this movie, because there weren't many other characters. Not in the sense of the Lighthouse, where there were only 2 characters and also a mermaid and a severed head. There was Natalia Dyer's character, Alice, and she was surrounded with what seemed like plot devices and messages. Her friend just kind of like established the system. The rumor about her just kind of culminated into kind of her coming to Jesus moment of the movie, which is ironically enough stepping away from the restraints of her beliefs in at least the way that she had interpreted them before. It just felt like all of the characters except for Alice just served the purpose of teaching Alice, and she was like the only character with agency at all throughout the movie. Going off of that, the theme in the movie of like overbearing religious teachings versus expression and life and reality, it felt very on the nose. The portrayal of all of the main ideas was just like so poignant. It was almost too much. It kind of felt like, oh yeah, this is the point. Oh look, there's the point as well. Oh, and there, and there, and there. Oh, definitely there. But it's like the same idea over and over and over and over again. And it's very readable from the beginning what's going to happen. And I think it worked for this movie, particularly because it was short. So it gets away with being so strong, I think. It doesn't have a lot of time to develop, to be subtle. And I don't think making it any longer would have helped much. The whole like idea of this movie is this weekend retreat. It's just like a concentrated mess of all of the different problems in the movie. It's such a good example of that. I think that having any exposition or like cool down would muddle it up a little bit. Again, this movie worked for me. I gave it a 4 out of 5. So those are my thoughts on the movies individually, and as we're winding down in this video, I'd like to talk about them as a whole. Something I've noticed kind of after I watched all these movies that they're all rather new. Casino Royale is kind of like the outlier there, because that came out in 2006, but the rest of them came out within the past 2 years. I didn't do that on purpose. I was just like, I want to watch this movie, and then I'll watch this movie, and then I'll watch this movie, and then I'll watch this movie. And I wasn't thinking about when they came out. So it just happened that I picked 4 newish movies. 3 of those movies contain at least some parts that are in black and white. Obviously, Casino Royale is what I'm referring to with the some parts, because it's really just only the beginning, whereas the other 2 are just completely in black and white. And that's all I really have to say about that, because I'm going to transition directly into my next thing I wanted to compare, which is that The Lighthouse and Mank both use techniques to harken back to old film. And they do this through black and white film, old style music, practical effects, and Mank takes it a step further by adding effects to the film to make it like look like it's kind of damaged a little bit, like the little blips and the lines and stuff. I've already talked about how I didn't really like that in Mank. It didn't bother me at all in The Lighthouse, mostly because I was worried about literally everything else. If there was any film grain or anything, I didn't notice it. So I think that film did it better. The differences between each movie, and really what I'd like to point out is the difference in genre. We had biographical drama, a spy/action movie, a psychological horror, and a comedy drama, or dramedy, if you will. Those are very different styles, and I certainly felt that when watching all of these movies. I like the diversity of having watched all these different kinds of movies. I'm not sure that I can do this every month, so to prevent myself from like having to like jump back and forth, I might just like not be so particular about what kind of movie I'm gonna watch next, because that's definitely like the focus of what I was doing. I wanted like to cherry pick a little bit of each. I'm gonna try to not do that in future months, which brings us to our next point, which is looking ahead to next month. What am I gonna do from here? And the answer to that is I want to incorporate more older movies. Watching new releases is fun, and it's current, and it keeps me with the times, and relevant, and trending, and all that lovely stuff. But I also want to get a taste of movies, you know, not just new movies. So I want to take a look at older films. A lot of these movies were very intense or driven, and I kind of want to have more movies where you just kind of sit back and enjoy the fact that you're watching a movie. The only one that came close to saying that for me was Casino Royale. That was a fun movie to watch. That's everything I wanted to say for this January movie roundup. If you enjoyed watching me talk about movies for a while, I'm going to be doing this at the beginning of every month, so why don't you just subscribe and you'll get that delivered to you nice and fresh. And if you really want this video, you can hit that bell to get notifications for when I upload, so you can see, hey, the new movie roundup is out. I can go watch that now and watch Peb Productions talk about movies for a while like I liked the last time. And if you did like it, make sure to leave a like on the video. If you can't wait a full month to see what I'm thinking about the movies that I'm seeing, make sure to follow my letterbox in the description below and written out here. Bye! And that's the video. I did it. I did it.